giving you useful and practical tips to help you make more money selling travel. This is the Art of Selling Travel Podcast, and here to guide you through it all, your host, Glenda Beagle.
Welcome back, Marilyn. I am so excited for you to be here today.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be joining you today and looking forward to continuing our conversation.
Absolutely. So obviously there's a lot of questions that came in between, and I had actually posted something within our Facebook group prior to doing any of the recordings. And so there was a lot of questions that advisors had for you so that they could possibly get a little bit more insight. So a couple of things. If you missed the previous episode, I'm going to encourage you to go back and check that out. We're going to link it up in the show notes for you. But the other thing is as we talked last time, Marilyn is from Canada. A lot of the listeners here are from the US or other parts of the world. So a lot of this information is going to help, but is not necessarily going to be specific to you or your region. So it's really important that you make notes so that you know the questions to ask. But some of the questions I think were pretty universal, especially the ones that came through the Facebook group. And so we're just going to dive right in. If that works for you, Marilyn, let's just get right to it.
Absolutely. Let's go.
Perfect. So at the time of recording and at the time of getting everything ready, we're all heavy in tax season. It was the end of the year. It's kind of pulling everything together. It's that, oh my heavens, what do I do with this big shoebox of stuff? And I don't know what it is. So one of the questions that came through the Facebook group is, what is the best first steps, or what should we have all together so that when we go into our accountant, they don't look at us funny. They look like we're actually prepared business owners. What are some of the things, whether it was profit, like what kind of statements or what kind of anything should somebody bring into their accountant?
The number one recommendation that I would make is that you need to pull together your information in a way that you can maintain consistently and make sense to you as the business owner. Because obviously it's critically important that we take care of the tax situation as small business owners. But the really critical thing with our numbers is to make sure that we are getting the information that we need in order to run our businesses. So having said that, there are a lot of things that people use to accumulate their revenue, to accumulate their expenses, to keep track of their mileage. And there are many options that can work. So I would encourage everyone to say, what works for me? Maybe I'm an Excel guru and I really just want to keep track of my revenue. I want to keep track of my travel. I want to keep track of my expenses. And I'm going to do that by starting either an Excel spreadsheet or a Google spreadsheet. And that's more than adequate. And when you bring that to an outside accountant, trust me, they have seen many, many combinations and permutations, and whatever you have, as long as the information is there, they can work with it. One of the things that I found is that the longer that I work with a business owner, the more that we become symbiotic, and I understand what's happening in their business and I can help them. And if there's any gaps in the information that I need, then I can communicate that to them and they can fill those gaps. I know that a lot of people rush out and they think, I've got to immediately hire a bookkeeper. I need to sign up for a QuickBooks subscription. I read X, Y, and Z, the IRS or CRA are going to come knocking on my door if I don't have perfect books. And that obviously is not true. For people who do want to have an accounting system and say, I do want to look at my profit and loss. I do want to know where my balance sheet is, on a monthly basis, weekly basis, whatever it is that feels good and makes sense to you. One of the programs that I'm recommending right now, and I have a lot of my retainer clients on, is Wave Accounting. And one of the reasons that I recommend that is because it's free. So the price is right for many small business owners. the way that they make money is if you start processing your payments through them, then they take 2.9% plus 60 cents per transaction. And it does cost money to run payroll. But I mean, that is a good option for the individual small business owner who feels that they want to have a quote unquote proper accounting system and that they want to be able to run reports on a regular basis.
That's awesome.
It's an option that I highly recommend.
That's awesome. So first and foremost, you have all just heard it here first. Don't knock the spreadsheet. And, I'm going to chase the squirrel for a second here. I hired what I thought was an accountant. It turns out where I live, you can call yourself an accountant without any sort of designation. I learned that one the hard way because when I got back my software and had gone through it and I had paid a ridiculous amount to have somebody else take care of this, none of it was right. There were income inside of expenses and there was expenses inside of the income. And when I said I wanted everything broke out, because once I get into my numbers and I get into my stats, I am one of those people who wants to see everything. I want to know exactly what I have spent on Post-its, paper, pens, my Staples addiction, let's just call it what it is, versus other things. And I want to know that if I'm going to go speak at a conference, how much did that conference cost me? So I want everything split out. And this bookkeeper took everything that was my coaching programs. So like any of the coaching programs I took, all of my office expenses, all of my anything that wasn't basically a trip, put into office expense, and then put everything else into travel. And I had basically 2 columns and everything was hodgepodge together. And so after having paid somebody a lot of money for all that, I found myself back on Google Sheets going through and manually putting everything else in. And I went, I don't know why I overthought it. That just ended up costing me a lot. And of course, because I had to go back, put everything into Google Sheets, I'm like, oh, snap. There is that monthly bill that I paid them every single month. And here I am, what was it, like 8 months later, 9 months later, looking at that overall bill as I'm up at 2:00 in the morning, entering it into Google Sheets. So sometimes we overthink it, and that can actually cost us more money. And I really, really loved the way you said, in a way that allows you to maintain the consistency. Because my understanding is that if you were ever to be audited, in the end, you need to understand your own books. You need to understand what are those expenses. That was the biggest reason I had to get rid of this person, because when I went through it, I'm like, I can't pull anything out of here. I can't make heads or tails of any of this. So if I was to be audited, I wouldn't be able to explain where this number came from. I wouldn't be able to say, oh, well, that's what this is, or that's what that is. I want to know crystal clear what everything is. I also want to know what my return on investment for everything I do is. So if I go speak at this event and I paid for travel, or I paid for this, or I'm billing them for travel and this and whatnot, I need to know exactly what those things cost. And so it ended up becoming easier just to do it on like a Google sheet or on an Excel spreadsheet type thing. So I love that we don't have to overthink it.
Yep, absolutely. And the other thing that I would remind people, no one is ever going to understand your business as well as you do. So if you go to an accountant or a bookkeeper or someone to assist you with, the number side of your business, and they make you feel like they're not somebody that you can work with, that they are not, number one criteria is to make sure that you have the information that you need to take your business to, the next level, or, to whatever that vision is for you, then you need to keep looking. Because the person who, like you said, just kind of took your information and ran with it and never said, Glenda, what is it that you need? Help me understand, these expenses, what do they relate to? If those conversations aren't happening, that's a huge gap in the information that you need in order to run your business. And like I said, first and foremost, that is the purpose of the accounting / finance side of your business. And of course, we need to make sure that we're taking care of our tax and compliance issues.
Absolutely. And it was one of those moments where I fully admit I was kind of like the ostrich with the head in the sand. And I was like, I'm paying somebody. I've outsourced this. This is no longer my problem. Part of the reason why the red flags didn't kick in as fast as it should have is because of the way I had prepared it, which thank heavens, because it made putting the Excel spreadsheet so much easier. When I gave the bank statements, when I gave the credit card statements, I attached the receipts for every transaction that was on there to each of those statements. I wrote on every single receipt exactly what it was and what category I wanted it put in. So ultimately, when I do that, you get that 2020 rear view experience time kind of thing. I'm like, well, geez, I did all the hard stuff. All I had to do was go ahead and enter it. But because I had laid it out so clearly and I had explicitly said, this is how I want it set up, it never occurred to me that wasn't how they were setting it up. Now, in fairness too, I might have been a couple months, between turning over the things, and I was having to pay on a monthly retainer, doing everything, whatever. So when I would hand it in, it'd be 3-4 months at a time. And then it would be a while before she got around to it and things like that. So now suddenly we have a much bigger gap. And the first time we sat down and went through it, I'm like, no, I really need it to be this way. And she's like, oh, my apologies. I'll go ahead and take care of that. Again, putting it out of my mind because I had so much faith in that person. Then when it came through on the second round, I'm like, whoa, I think we're done. And because it was like, no, you haven't listened at all. And so we all think that we're hiring professionals. And the same goes true for when our clients hire us. We want them to have faith in us, but we also need to earn that. And so whether we have to kind of test out our accountant a little bit just to stay on top of it. And in the end, it's your responsibility to understand and know your own numbers, but also too, your clients. When I hear people say, well, they don't trust me, they micromanage. What are you possibly putting out there that's giving them doubt? Or better yet, maybe you're just going through this phase so that they can be like, okay, no, I have faith. I know that they can do it. Because I assure you, I am a lot more skeptical of working with new professionals now than what I was then, because I learned that lesson, because that's come through. So there was another little squirrel for y'all. Okay, so another question that came through was preparing, if this is your very first tax season as a travel advisor or as a new business owner type thing, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about, that they should be doing?
The number one thing is to make sure that you keep track of everything and that you have those receipts organized. And, that, like you said, you've documented what everything relates to. When you're first starting out in business, there are a lot of considerations right up front. And, this is something that you should be discussing with a lawyer or with your accountant. Things like, should I be operating as a sole proprietorship? If you have a partner, should we be a partner? Should we be incorporating? If we're not going to incorporate right from the beginning, what are some of the indications that now is the time to incorporate? On the US side, things are a little bit different than in Canada. But the same kind of broad strokes, right? In Canada, we have a statement of business activities, a form 2125, and that's a good place to review and say, here are all the categories that I need to be keeping track of and the things that I need to be thinking about. The comparable form on the US side is the Form C, which is what's used for sole proprietorships or people who have S corporations that they've elected to have the activity pass through onto their personal tax returns. So it's a matter of having all of those kind of administrative details together. The first year that somebody helps you with your tax return, they're also going to want to see your prior year tax return just to get all of those kind of family details, your administrative details, social security number, social insurance number, depending on whether you're on the US or the Canadian side of the border. Whether there are any tax balances that need to be considered and brought forward. So, those kind of things for the actual statement of your business. Excuse me. Then there are other things in terms of tracking, am I operating this business from home? If I'm operating the business from home, then am I tracking those expenses? What kind of expenses can I deduct? How do I know how much? For mileage, if I'm driving my vehicle, my personally owned vehicle for business, I need to have some way that I've kept track of that mileage. Basically all of those things, because on both the Canadian and the US side of the border, the rule says, if I am incurring an expense that is necessary to create business income, then unless it has specific exclusion rules, I'm allowed to write that off against my business income. So all of those things that you've incurred, you bought a computer, or perhaps you had a personal computer and now you've transferred it to business use. I had to set up the stationery in the beginning that I had. How is that treated? All of those kind of details. So both what you put into the business to start it and what you've incurred in order to generate that business income, all of those should be tracked, and you should be prepared to discuss them with your tax professional.
I love that. And one of the things, just in terms of the things that cost you to operate your business, things like that, I would be remiss in the travel industry if we didn't talk about personal travel. That was one that was very popular. So because you're not in the travel industry, I'm going to explain for Marilyn, and if you're new, for you as well. But we have something called FAMs, which are familiarizations. And that's where we will go with a supplier or a tour operator or something like that, explore a destination, explore the way that they do their product, things like that. Rarely are you actually allowed to take a spouse or a partner or family. Sometimes they'll do it a little bit different. But then there's also times where there's what advisors will call their DIY. So they're going to build their own. They're going to do it themselves, and then they're going to take their whole family, or full out, they're just going to go on family vacation, personal trip, and they want to know how many of those they can write off. So I've seen where a lot of people have abused this and whatnot. And so I don't necessarily want to put you on the spot with this one, because I think that that's a conversation between them and their own accountant and whatnot. But where, from a higher level, without giving specific advice, because I don't want to get you into a bad spot either, what would you say needs to be part of the conversation when it comes to something like that?
Yeah, it's always a little muddly when you're combining personal and business. And I can see that travel agents would have this challenge on a regular basis. Like you've said, this is definitely something that needs to be discussed with your tax professional. It's also a place where you need to keep really, really meticulous records. The way that both the IRS and CRA look at these things is, what was the primary purpose of the trip? So in general, if you went on a FAM trip and, it was business, and then, oh yeah, my partner came and met me for the last 2 days, then you would have a trip that's primarily for business, and you have a small portion of it that was personal. So the business expenses allocated to business, and the personal expenses obviously not eligible for write-off. If the converse is true, like you said, you're doing a DIY, you say, I'm in, Riviera Maya, and I sell this destination. The primary purpose is, my family is coming with me, and oh yeah, I'm going to stop by and look at a resort. Then the expenses are largely not deductible. But if you spent 1 day with really concrete examples of business expenses that you incurred, then those specific business expenses would likely be a write-off against your business income. You have to be careful too, that you have to be able to show the connection between the trip, the travel, and your business. So if you are exclusively selling, Mexican vacations, and you're trying to write off a European junket in, August, the connection is not going to be there. It's not going to be obvious. And if you're going to even try it, you need to have that. I'm currently selling Mexico, but my intention is within the next 12 months, I'm going to shift my focus to include European vacations. Then there might be some justification there. But these are the kind of things, if you do get selected for audit, these are the kind of questions that both the IRS and CRA are going to ask you. This is where you need to say, it was June 1st. Here's all the things that I did for business. And, here is how I calculated the write-off. The more specific you can be and the more that you can tell the story of how this is connected to your business, the better the write-off will be, and the more that you can justify it, and the more likely it will be accepted by the taxing authorities.
Awesome. I love it. So right there, that's where you want to make sure your business plan is kind of laid out at the beginning of the year. You have your goals and things like that, so that you can, if you do get audited, say, no, in January, I said I was going to begin exploring other destination opportunities. These were my top 3 targets. And an opportunity came up in August. So I jumped on it because it hit one of those 3. Now, back in my day, when we did FAMs or things of that nature, we had to create what was called a FAM report. And we wrote it out. It was all the notes we took, the things we learned about the hotels, or the destination, or whatever it is, depending on the type. Then we took that information and we shared it amongst everybody else in the office. And then we kept that FAM report. I have actually encountered in talking with other CPAs and other such in the that have experience with the industry, that without a FAM report, there is no proof that you actually did any business there. Because it's really easy. Oh yeah, no, I did lots of investigation. Well, where are your notes? Where is the information? Because if you were in any other industry and you were going on an exploratory tour, you're going to have notes. You're going to have your meetings. You're going to have all of these other sorts of things. And yet this is one of the red flags in travel, when you travel and you don't have those things. So who did you meet with? What did you learn? What are your notes? So you did a site inspection of 6 hotels. What are your notes beyond just pictures? Because it's great to take pictures, but what are the notes? What are the things? Who's the contacts? What are the business cards you got? What is all of that information that you have that you've now pulled together so that you can go back and reference it? Because in the end, doing an exploratory trip to Mexico to find out how well you sleep on the beach versus by the pool, it's not really a write-off. It's just not.
Yeah. The really critical thing is that, like you said, you have to have those notes and you have to be able to connect them to your business income. Whether that's, planned or actual, because obviously if you have the intention to, sell Mayakoba really aggressively next season and none of your clients bite on Mayakoba, well, you didn't control that. But, if you can say, okay, well, last year I sold 1 trip to Mayakoba and I went on a FAM trip. I learned all about it. I had all of these experiences. They're all documented. And look at the 6 months after I returned from the trip, I sold 20 trips to Mayakoba because I was so much more informed on the destination. That's something that both, CRA and IRS can wrap their hands around and say, yes, I see the connection between these expenses and your business income.
I love it. And just an FYI, that is also how you get suppliers to put you on a FAM or to give you FAM rates, is when you can say, I went to destination X, this was my sales prior, this is what I did while I was there, this is my sales after. They're going to be like, oh, we want you. And that's how you get yourself onto some of those. Because I know that's a big question I get from a lot of advisors. How do I get picked for a FAM? How do I get on them? You got to create an opportunity for them to see how they're going to get their money back. These are not vacations. You are going out of town on business. And so it's really important to have that clear, distinct differentiation.
Yes.
So another question that came up, and I think this one is so critical for so many people. How do I know how much I need to set aside for taxes? Which for some people is probably like, wait, I have to set money aside for taxes?
Yeah, and this is really critical because neither CRA or the IRS are pleased when people cannot pay their tax bills. And it creates a huge amount of stress. In general, the recommendation is to set aside 25 to 30% of what you have as your net income for taxes. That's generally a safe number for your income taxes. It's a little bit different if you have a corporate vehicle, so you definitely need to speak with your tax preparer, your accountant. If you have, your personal situation and then the corporation situation, because then things can get a little less clear. Actually much less clear. And there are, tax deferral opportunities when you have two entities. But if you're operating things personally as a sole proprietor, or if you're using one of the pass-through elections on the US side of the border, then 25 to 30% is very safe. The other comment that I would make is if you're collecting any amount that's actually the government's money, such as employee withholdings or sales taxes, you must put those aside in a separate account, and you must have those available to remit on the day that they're due, or bad things will likely happen. The government does not take it well when you say, I know that I, collected all of this HST, but I don't have it to remit, or I know that I withheld CPP and taxes from my employees, but I'll get it to you in another month or two. The interest, the penalties, the uncomfortable conversations with the tax authorities will definitely not be worth it. Just make sure that anything that you're collecting on behalf of the government, you have available to pay on the deadline.
That's awesome. Okay, before we wrap up, because I have a hunch for those that are just tipping their toes into the accounting side, they might already, be in a cold sweat.
For sure.
But that's the beauty of this podcast. If you are brand new to doing your own accounting, or you just haven't been getting the results and you have stress and other such, because what Marilyn just described, I can feel that temperature, that blood rush all the way through. Go back and re-listen to this episode, because it's going to help give you some of those answers that you might need. But any last thoughts before we wrap up?
I would just say that, number one, it's important that you understand your own numbers and that you use them to make business decisions, as well as to make sure that you stay on side with compliance. And number two, you don't have to become a finance expert. That's not the purpose. And you don't need to learn everything at once. As you progress in your business, you'll become more and more comfortable with these concepts and with the financial side of your business. But you do want to have a deep enough understanding so that you know the questions to ask your tax professional, so that you do understand, as you said, what margin am I making on what sorts of events? So it definitely is a process. It's not something that's all or nothing. So give yourself grace, keep moving forward. Understand that even if you don't consider yourself a quote unquote math person, that this is something that you will be able to master in order to use the financial side of your business to drive your results.
Awesome. I love it. One last thing, just what you said in there, when you go to have a conversation with your accountant or whoever it is, what happens if you don't understand what they're saying? Is that a common thing?
If you don't understand what your accountant is saying, do not be afraid to ask them to say it again. And if you feel that your accountant is not someone that you can talk to, perhaps you need to keep looking. Every single one of my clients, we get to the point where we can talk about anything with respect to their business. I want to be on their team and helping them move forward and get the results, the vision that they want to have. So if you're not feeling that with the professional that you're working with, then don't be afraid to keep looking. And if someone is speaking in jargon and you don't understand it, don't be afraid to say, would you be able to repeat that in different language? Because I'm not sure that I was following. Or saying, help me understand what you meant when you said, my margins are not where they should be.
Awesome. I love it. Now,
Never
just
be
before
afraid.
we wrap up, where can people find you if they want to connect with you or go deeper on some of the things that you offer?
Absolutely. I'm on Instagram at Marilyn J. Crowley. And also my website is at marilyncrowley.com.
Perfect. We're going to link all of that up in the show notes. Plus, I think there might be a little something coming. So definitely check out the show notes for everything to find Marilyn and to, just let those shoulders drop when it comes to working through your accounting and your numbers and all of that sort of thing. I love what Marilyn said about knowing your numbers is how you make decisions in your business. Because if you don't have those numbers, you can't make informed decisions. All right, guys, until next week, happy selling.